I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing. Antifa!
Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are so thrilled to be here, and thank you so much for joining. That was a new intro. Thank you so much to Brad for that intro, and that was, of course, nice music under the wonderful words of President Donald Trump. So now that it is 1 year in to the administration, we decided to take out the old, bring in the new, get rid of the Joe Biden music that we usually use. And we are finally, I guess, we are facing reality and the fact that Donald Trump is president. So thank you, Brad, for that. We have an excellent show for you today. And we have another person who's coming in onto the show who we just added. So we're extremely excited. And let's see, I'm going to tell you about the people who are joining us during the second half. So during the second half of the show, we are talking to Ollie Vargas, who's been on the show before. He is a Bolivian journalist who is currently based in Beijing. He's going to talk to us about the way that the Venezuela attack, the attempted regime change, the kidnapping, how that's affecting the rest of Latin America and what other Latin American leaders and people are doing in response to this. We're also going to be joined by Chris Gilbert, who is a professor of political studies at the Universidad Bolivariana de Venezuela. And he is in Caracas right now, and that's where he's based. And he's going to talk to us about literally what's happening on the streets of Venezuela right now. Also, please don't forget to hit subscribe and press the bell. That way you won't miss any of the streams that we do. For instance, Wednesday, I'll be doing an extra stream on Pakistan, because that is a subject that gets really neglected, as people probably noticed, by even leftist media. So I'll be talking to the sister of Bushra Bibi Bushra, who is the sister. Sorry, I'll be speaking to that sister, Mariam, who is the sister of Bushra Bibi. And she is the wife of Imran Khan. So she's in jail with Imran Khan. So we're going to be getting some great interviews tomorrow. Also, Hassan Ali, who's a journalist based in Pakistan, and a lawyer, a barrister who is part of close to Imran Khan, who has had his home burned down. So so many great things happening. Again, that's why you want to hit subscribe and then press the bell. Also, please like the stream if you haven't already liked the stream. It really does help the algorithm. And make sure that you become Patreon supporters, because we literally couldn't do the show without you, without your Patreon support. And you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And we are going to bring on our first two guests. Very, very excited to be bringing them back onto the show. They've both been on the show, but this is the first time that they're coming on together. So this is a historic moment. We are bringing onto the show Greg Stoker and Mike Prysner. Greg is a former United States Army Ranger with a background in special operations and human intelligence collection. He conducted 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan during the unfortunately named Global War on Terror, and is now an anti-war activist, host of the Colonial Outcast podcast, and an analyst at Mint Press News. So welcome, Greg. Hello, Greg.
Oh, my mic's on. Yeah.
There you are. Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. Great to be here as always.
Of course. Thank you. And also joining is Mike Prysner, who joined the Army 3 months before 9/11. And in March 2003 was part of the invasion of Iraq. After 12 months in the occupation, he became an outspoken opponent of the war and became known for speeches, protests, and veterans organizing against U.S. imperialism. Since 2015, he has been the producer and co-writer for Abby Martin's show, The Empire Files, and is also the host of Eyes Left, the socialist anti-war military podcast. And Mike is co-director with Abby Martin of the excellent documentary, Earth's Greatest Enemy. So welcome, Mike and Greg. Thanks so much for joining.
Hello.
Hello. So I would love to start out by asking you what you think the world needs to know about what is happening in Venezuela based on your military experiences. or based on your analysis of the military? Or
So I guess we're doing chicken. Who's gonna go first?
Well, I mean, I can start really quickly. Yeah. I mean, I don't have any real military expertise outside of also being sent to a regime change oil war as a teenager, though, that ended up being quite a big debacle. So that's where, that's really where my expertise lies on military stuff. I do want to say, though, that one thing that I have seen the most, like looking at things the past couple of days, I'm sure Greg can speak to this also, is that the operation kind of proved that it was an inside job of sorts, that there had to have been collaboration from within the Venezuelan military, the Venezuelan government, to let these special operations soldiers come in, not a single American casualty, no U.S. helicopter shot down, capture the head of state, a heavily guarded head of state of another country. And I think that is an interesting indicator of how, I think people recognize that the United States is the biggest, most powerful military in the world, and with the most advanced elite special operations and most heavily armed and well-funded special operations and intelligence services in the world. And so really, when you look at a country like Venezuela, that is a poor country that doesn't have anywhere near the arsenal, the training and things like that the U.S. has, people can kind of know in their minds that the U.S. has a very powerful military, but then when a very powerful military carries out a surprise attack very effectively, they're a little bit surprised. And so I think it's not surprising to me. And of course, we don't know all the details. And we know that a number, close to 80 people were killed. Like his entire security detail was massacred. It kind of isn't surprising to me that the most elite of the U.S. special operations were able to bombard the country after training for a very long time on mock replicas of the presidential palace. So, I don't know, Greg, if you agree, but I feel like it doesn't look like there was inside collaboration. It looks like just, this is what the U.S. military can do. The full weight of the U.S. military can do.
Yeah. I kind of grew up in that community. When I was in Ranger Regiment, like a couple of my squad leaders ended up going to Delta Force. We did joint operations with them. It's just like very, very suspect that that went on without like any hitches, no casualties on the U.S. side. I think I don't know, kind of when these type of operations happen, like the actual circumstances surrounding what actually happened gets like teased out over time. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard to make a determination. From what I'm seeing and what I believe is that it's still a very dynamic situation, and we can give a lot of supposition. But I think what's important to talk about, especially with regards to like the propaganda coming out of Washington, if we're going to stay like strictly military about this, I do want to talk about the use of special operations as military propaganda to project strength, military strength, when it doesn't actually exist in the way that people think it does. And that's been happening since the Vietnam War. So like right now, there's a lot of, what I call NatSec psychos, really like high on their own supply, talking about how incredible this operation was. Cybercom was involved. They shut down like all the internet, so nothing could really get out. They shut down air defense systems through electronic warfare. And there was also airstrikes. And it's just like no other military could accomplish this. Yeah, that's true. But it also masks the fact that, we have an absolutely critical munition storage and can't wage high intensity conflicts. So we do have a really elite special operations force, but we're losing in a lot of other fields, like full spectrum dominance. This fascination with the unipolar moment and being able to project power and dominance throughout the world, that no longer exists. That was a failed mission right now. But we still do have these elite forces that need massive infrastructure to back them up. As Mike was talking about, you just had this huge intelligence apparatus. You had to construct training facilities that looked what we call like glass houses, maybe, that looked exactly like the inside of the building. Generally, you get that information through human intelligence sources, unless you can find a way to get the blueprints, which is generally doesn't really happen. And then all this happened, and Maduro got captured by Delta Force, handed over to the DEA, and now he's being tried. But like that really is the extent of it. Like we're showing that we can, with impunity, gunboat diplomacy, gangster imperialism, whatever you want to call it, we can extraordinarily rendition anybody we want. But that doesn't mean we're capable of waging these, wars like in Iran or over the Strait of Taiwan. But it is a good propaganda piece, absolutely. And that's kind of what I see, because we've been using special operations through that lens to project strength throughout the Vietnam War when we were clearly losing it. Everybody knew we were. And so to me, just from that lens, it's kind of more of the same thing.
Yeah, Greg, we won't really know what happened until all the Navy SEALs involved write their own books with.
But there weren't SEALs involved, so we're not going to get any books.
Oh no, sad. Oh, well, that would have been the key right there. But no, Greg brings up a good point too, that I think in some ways the reason, this is the Trump administration is treating this as this like great show of strength. Like, look how badass we are. We can go do something like this. We could take out a head of state, and it can be this perfect operation. But the fact that they had to make this a special operations raid, it shows the fact that they couldn't actually wage a real ground war in Venezuela. I mean, their own assessments, like they ran like war games a year ago. The Pentagon's own assessments of a ground war in Venezuela, like the type of invasion that we thought was something that was the Trump administration was mulling, which they were, because they've the U.S. has tested for this. They knew that it would just be like a guerrilla war that would take many, many thousands of American troops. That would end in a quagmire. So they know that they don't really have the capability, as big and as powerful as the American military is, to go in and invade the country and do like an Iraq war style thing. They knew it would end up very similar to how the Iraq war invasion ended up, or the invasion of Afghanistan for that matter. And so the admission after, trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government since Chavez came into power a very long time, almost 30 years ago, they're like, well, we can do this. And they can do that very effectively. And, the reason that, Grant, you mentioned handing them over to the DEA, like the only reason that they involve the DEA is just to claim some kind of legal legitimacy to this, because, which may end up backfiring on them, because really what Hegseth and Miller and all these people are really talking about the new Monroe Doctrine. They're being very open about the fact this is our hemisphere, these memes that they're putting out. They're being very brazen about the fact that we are going to send our military in and kidnap a head of state who we don't like because he won't give us their oil. Like, they're saying that openly, but there's no legal basis for that. And, instead of whisking him away to Guantanamo or, like in other regime changes, right? Like with Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, they're not handing him over to rival forces to be lynched. It's not like an Assad situation where he could be exiled and then another force could come in and immediately take power in the country. They had to do something with him. And so to pretend that this was like a legal thing, like, well, he's wanted by the DEA for drug trafficking, even though he doesn't make it on the DEA's annual list of major drug threats in the world. He's not on that list. But that is just this kind of cover. Otherwise, you're just admitting, yeah, we're just going and doing this war crime. But the downside of that for the Trump administration, for this temporary legal veneer, is now they have to try this in court. And the judge in this case is not like he's not a Trump appointed psycho. He's just like a regular judge, I guess. And so, they're going to have to prove this thing. And, and one of the charges on Maduro is like possession of machine guns, which I guess you can try any leader of any country with that charge, unless they're like Costa Rica.
Right. Well said. Yeah.
And, I kind of differ from a lot of people that voices in our space. To me, it doesn't seem like an Iraq 2.0. I mean, the oil thing, obviously, but for me, it's more Panama. Just to remind people, Noriega was our kind of anti-left puppet, paid CIA informant in the region. And, he actually did get involved with the drug trade, and he was on one of our biggest strategic assets, the Panama Canal. And, it came from a time, and one of the reasons we took Noriega out was because he was just too big of an embarrassment. We were waging an information war against capitalism versus communism, the U.S. versus the Soviet Union. So we did have to have some pretense of doing things the right way. So, and he was a pretty egregious dictator. Still, the UN condemned it, made a resolution about it. Still extrajudicial completely. But yeah, we black bagged him and also handed him over to the DEA, brought him back to the United States. He did decades in prison, did it like a gilded exile in France, as I recall.
Right.
But it's kind of more similar like that. What makes the Panama situation a little easier is because there was already like an elected official that, people were somewhat excited about, as opposed to Noriega. That doesn't exist in Venezuela. First of all, there's too many factions. There's factions within the military itself. Some of the parts of the military are going to be loyal to the Bolivarian government. Some parts or some people within the military may have sold them out at the same time. So it's an incredibly complex and dynamic situation. And when you hear like hawks like Rubio and, whoever else in DC saying, well, this is what we want to happen, this is what they don't really have a plan. Rubio, if it was up to him, we would have like activated the 82nd Airborne and like jumped into, whatever. But, he's not able to do that. Now, he has been able to parlay divergent, not opposing agendas within the White House and within the cabinet. Like, Stephen Miller, he's off doing his own like domestic war on the home front. Pete Hegseth wants to put the U.S. military in a more pugilistic footing. Donald Trump wants the oil. He was able to parlay all of these things together and get this operation to happen in the first place, even though there was a lot of pushback, even at like the Pentagon. But this is the extent that we're able to go and willing to go politically. One thing I did want to point out, like, this is no longer the Cold War. We are the unchallenged hegemon, and we're finally acting like it. We're just like soft power does not matter anymore. Everybody get in line or you're getting the stick.
Yeah. That's the most concerning thing for me. I mean, I don't believe they have a plan either. Plans are hard. Chaos is easy. So, that like with the legal case, like the case could end up just being thrown out. And then what's going to happen? They're going to have to send him back defeated and probably maybe even backfire in a way that this is actually unifying Venezuela in a way that hadn't before and increasing Maduro's popularity in Venezuela. That's yet to be seen. But the fact that Trump, we know that the kind of guy Trump is, like, he's kind of nuts, and he's very enamored with television and optics and things like that. I think the experience of him watching the live feed from the raid, and not just watching it as an observer, but being like, I am the one who did this. And the fact that it was a successful mission, the fact that they started saying, he's just like, this was awesome. I can do this anywhere. And he can kind of do it anywhere. And so I think that's the scary thing at this moment, and where I think opposition to it and people can make a decisive difference in the days ahead.
I mean, we are starting to see a pattern here, because when Israel just out of nowhere kind of like bombed Iran, he was in the Situation Room being like, you know what, that's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
We do it better.
Yeah.
What's up with these B-2 bombers? Like, I want my like moment where I get to like bomb something. So he did seem very giddy. Like, he got his like Osama bin Laden Situation Room pick that Obama got.
With Twitter on instead of like just searching Venezuela. What are people saying about me in Venezuela right now on the big screen in the Situation Room?
Well, it's interesting. Oh, right. Yeah, that was insane. But it's interesting that the U.S. likes to talk about, the U.S. and Israel likes to talk about their shared values. And I guess what we're seeing with this is kind of yet another example of shared values, right? Total disregard for the rule of law. And while pretending to be this democracy, a beacon of democracy. I want to ask you guys, we're going to talk more about the oil, because I do have a question about that. But I want to ask you guys to react to something that Mike Waltz said. He was talking about the U.S.'s intention at the UN Security Council meeting on Monday.
I now give the floor to the representative.
Marco Rubio stated just yesterday, this is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be used as a base of operation for our nation's adversaries and competitors and rivals of the United States. You can't turn Venezuela into the operating hub for Iran, for Hezbollah, for gangs, for Cuban intelligence agents, and other malign actors that control that country. You cannot continue to have the largest energy reserves in the world under the control of adversaries of the United States, under the control of illegitimate leaders and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, and stolen by a handful of oligarchs inside of Venezuela. But
Hezbollah, Iran, the Menendez brothers,
Right.
like every.
Suddenly
Yeah.
they don't like a handful of oligarchs.
I know. I know they sound like, what are they, like Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I really, it's hard to respond to Trump administration people because they're just so brazenly and openly colonial. Like, and I think that a big hallmark of this administration, and you can see it most clearly through like the social media posting, it's just like the one glue that holds all MAGA together, right? Like they care about pedophiles, like QAnon helped propel him to victory, yet he's probably the top guy in the Epstein files. That doesn't actually matter. Like, they're the peace party, the anti-war party, but when he starts doing a bunch of wars, that doesn't really matter either. Like, the big glue in MAGA is like racism and jingoism. And so this kind of celebration of like, we're not going to apologize anymore for being an empire or pretend that we're not an empire, and we want to display these like really hyper nationalist, militaristic types of posturing, and then actually doing it and going and actually carrying out these grand acts of violence to make like memes out of them. I mean, it's really just like this policy that they've continuously done, like with the ICE hype videos and things like that. It's throwing red meat out to this like racist and jingoistic sector of the MAGA base, which is not the majority of the population and doesn't even represent all disaffected people who ended up voting for Trump. But when it comes to this open posture of like, yeah, like this is our hemisphere, we should control this part of the world. I just encourage people really to look into the history of Latin America and how it has suffered as a colony for centuries. Like, it's been really heartening during the Gaza genocide to see how many people kind of woke up to the situation by understanding Palestine as a colonized people and nation, and understanding the historical perspective of why we should support Palestine and support Israel instead of looking at the last couple decades. Well, Latin America has that story too, and Venezuela has that story too. I mean, we're talking centuries of brutal colonialism, and the last 100 years being dominated by American colonialism and American imperialism. And those are some really harrowing stories. I mean, even in the 80s, like the U.S. operations, I mean, this is like ISIS level brutality stuff that was wrought on the people of Latin America by these forces that the U.S., that Trump and his people are now kind of saying are going to reassert themselves.
Yeah, and of course, there's that famous quote. I mean, just speaking to the legacy of devastation that the United States has wrought on Latin America. I mean, there's this great quote by Porfirio Diaz, who was the Mexican president during the 19th century. And he said, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States." So that's the punishment of so many countries who are near the United States.
Trump says they're next.
Yeah.
After Cuba, I guess.
Yeah. So what is next? I mean, what do you think? What is this going to open up and lead to? If you're watching this now, you're in luck because this whole thing is free for you, and it's up to see. If you're watching this later, there may be parts of this that are Patreon only. And so to see the full stream, you're going to want to go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And we are going to, let's see, where are we in likes, Brad? How many likes do we have? Let's see, I can actually check. I think Brad is frozen. Oh, no.
I'm seeing... Well, not too bad, about half.
Oh, all right. Not too bad. But guys, we need this higher. So I know that half of you are not hate watching this. So let's get it to higher. We're not even at 50%. And again, I know you guys are not hate watching this, at least I hope. And that's in the horizontal one. But what about in the vertical one? That will be interesting. We should like pit people against each other. Which audience is more enthusiastic, Brad? The horizontal audience or the people watching on their mobile phones?
Well, I think that it varies from week to week.
Right now, I mean, if you go in.
Oh, well, right now, and Andrew just said now we are 332 away.
Wow, that's great. From subs, yeah.
So yeah, I would say this week the horizontal takes it.
All right. Well, wow, mobile people. Okay.
Though the vertical, there was a very nice super chat from Anthony Aguilar earlier.
Oh, hi, Anthony. Oh, yeah. We have to have Anthony on soon. And we're going to have him on within the next month. Definitely. Yeah. Okay, great. So let me see. Where are the super chats? I can't. For some reason. Oh, I see. Let's see this Anthony one. Oh, Anthony Aguilar. 3 of my favorite people: Katie, Greg, Mike, Patriots. Thank you, Anthony. And then don't worry, bruh. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm not sure if that's a joke, but anyway. Well, we are going to keep the show going. So we just spoke to 2 people who are in the military. Now we're going to speak to 2 people who had very different perspectives. And they are located not in the United States, which is a very important perspective to have in the first place. But that's not all. They are so much more than that. So we're going to be talking to Ollie Vargas, who is a Bolivian journalist who is now based in Beijing. He's going to talk to us about what the view from other countries in Latin America is like right now. And we're also bringing onto the show, making his Katie Halper Show debut, very exciting, Chris Gilbert, professor of political studies, Universidad Bolivariana de Venezuela, co-host and co-creator of the Marxist educational podcast and television program Escuela de Cuadros, and the author of the book Commune or Nothing, Venezuela's Communal Movement and its Socialist Project, and a contributing editor at Monthly Review magazine. So welcome, Chris, and welcome, Ollie. Hi.
Thank you, Katie.
Of course. Chris, you are, okay, now you're unmuted. Okay, great. Welcome, Chris.
I'm happy to be here, Katie.
Thanks for coming. So Brad, by the way, I just forwarded you some photos that Chris was kind enough to, okay, you got them? Okay, great. So let's, I guess I wanted to start with you, Chris, because you are actually in Caracas as we speak. What are you seeing on the ground, and how does what is happening on the ground differ from the way that Western media is covering it?
Well, it differs in an extreme form. I'd like to back up and begin at the beginning. You know, we were bombed here in Caracas about 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, and the bombing lasted for about 45 minutes. Very early in the morning, we got communiques from the government explaining what was going on. And then the defense minister, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, spoke to people and indicating the military was loyal, that the country had been attacked by the United States. We learned the sad truth that Nicolas Maduro had been kidnapped. Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been kidnapped and taken to the United States. But during the course of the day, you can say that we did everything right here. People remained calm. All the protests in the streets were in favor of the government. All the demonstrations were in favor of the government. I didn't hear a single slogan from the window against the government. And people did the normal thing here, which is kind of understood that you go to Miraflores Palace. That's the kind of playbook we had from the coup d'etat in 2002, the anti-coup d'etat in 2002. Everyone comes down to Miraflores to defend the president, to defend the country. And that's exactly what happened. So we saw a spontaneous manifestation the first day. Open mic, actually. There was an open mic in front of Miraflores with people giving everybody from grandmothers to young people to motorcycle riders, to some parliamentarians giving discourses, spontaneous discourses, very impressive. And then at 3 p.m., we had Delcy Rodriguez speak. Delcy Rodriguez, again, did everything right. She, according to the Constitution, according to the plan, Constitution and plan, she is the acting president. She insisted that Nicolas Maduro be returned. She gave the lie to the claim that Trump had uttered a few minutes earlier that she was collaborating with them. She said, we're not collaborating with you at all. She said, this is a colony of no country. And she guaranteed, not only through her words, but through the image, because she had the defense minister on her side, she had the foreign affairs minister at her side, and she had the interior minister, Diosdado Cabello, at her side. She guaranteed that the chain of command was intact. And then later in the day, she was sworn in as acting president. Nicolas Maduro remains the unique president of Venezuela. So we did everything right. I think we have the lessons of the many attempts that have occurred against this revolution in the past, and a certain kind of anti-imperialism is in people's bones here, and they knew what to do. And so we've had both, serenity, but also determination here. And I think there's one other thing that I like to highlight, which is that Delcy Rodriguez acted like a real revolutionary when she said how we're going to defend the country. She said it would be defended according to Nicolas Maduro's plans. She said it would be defended. The plan was the union of civilians, military, and police. That's an old idea that Chavez developed, the military-civilian alliance. And Nicolas Maduro elaborated, including the police. And we've actually seen that on the streets. I sent you images of people. Yeah. That was the Sunday march. The Sunday march had the armed people come before Miraflores. And this, of course, is the formula for resisting and even defeating a superior military enemy. You bring the whole people together. You rely on the people. Arms were given out in the barrios on Saturday morning.
Okay, there's a woman. I mean, not to sound reductive or old school, but this is not something you see every day. So you, 2 women holding arms, yeah, weapons, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you see today. I mean, that's what we see throughout the day, especially in the night. The streets are occupied by armed civilians. And I have to say that's a total proof that this is a democratic country. If you have the people in arms and therefore the people are empowered, then the only way you exist is because you're a democratically approved government. That's why all of this BS that you hear from the United States government, they actually don't even try to construct coherent lies. One day they say Nicolas Maduro is supposed to be a drug trafficker, which is completely absurd. The other day they retreat that. They say that he's killed people, millions of people. There's absolutely no. I've seen how the government manages protests here. It manages it with a great deal of tranquility, with restraint. Even though the protests are often of a fascist character, which is what we saw in the last decade. Or then they change discourse and talk about corruption, which is also absolutely false because Nicolas Maduro has fought against corruption very aggressively. He recently took out an extremely corrupt minister, put them in prison and the whole team around that minister. And as a result of that, that's the other thing is that Maduro has been a successful president in every sense, essentially. Not only did he figure out how to overcome the blockade, a task that was extraordinary, there was this cruel, even genocidal blockade against the Venezuelan people, but he managed to get around that through different techniques. And things have improved markedly over here over the past 5 years. And then the most amazing thing, the real thing that proves that Nicolas Maduro is a revolutionary is that having overcome the worst of the blockade, he once again turned to the social programs, he turned to the communes, he turned to building socialism. So whatever they say, Nicolas Maduro is a popular president, he's a revolutionary president, and he has the support of the people. And I want to end with one last thing in the revolutionary playbook. When Hugo Chavez was kidnapped in 2002 by the people carrying out the coup d'etat at that time, he managed to send a message to the people. He relied on low-ranking officers to send out a message to the people. He scribbled it on a piece of paper, passed it around, and it came out to the people that said, "I haven't resigned." And that's what people expected from Nicolas Maduro, and that's exactly what he did. He gave this sign to people that we were going to win, that we were going to fight and win. He showed a fist and a victory sign. So we have a playbook here. We've done things right. Of course, they had a punctual military victory against us. But we followed the right playbook. People have acted like revolutionaries, and they've had the support of the people in doing it.
Right. Yeah. There's also a video, by the way, that I thought we could show. Breakthrough News posted this, and it says what mainstream media won't show you, because those photos that you sent are very instructive. But we also have a video, and that is Brad. You have that, right? I think it's already in there. And then we'll... So what do they sing? Either of you can tell us. You can just watch a little bit.
They say the united people won't be defeated.
Right.
This is a big avenue. This is the march from yesterday. They had to choose a very large avenue to include all these people. This was a massive march that occurred yesterday. And Nicolas Maduro's son spoke at the end of it.
Yeah. Ollie, I want to get your insights. We're going to be talking again, as I've said, about the way that the rest of Latin America is experiencing this. We're also going to be talking to you about the view from Beijing, which is where you are based right now. But you posted a video that I think is pretty shocking, maybe shocking to some people. It's of Diosdado Cabello, who is Venezuela's interior minister, and he's going around this. I'll say what you. I'll read your tweet, and then we'll show the video. So Venezuela's interior minister Diosdado Cabello is patrolling the streets of Caracas right now, ensuring that order is maintained and that U.S. collaborators do not attempt anything foolish. So let's take a look at this video. Okay, so tell us about Cabello.
Diosdado Cabello is he's the current interior minister, but he's also the sort of general secretary of the ruling party of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. It's kind of seen as one of the main guys of the government, along with Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the acting president. But he's has been a senior, one of the most senior members of the government for a long time, for many years, and part of the, when you talk about what is the state, who is the state in Venezuela, is not a one-person sort of personalist regime where one figure sitting in the presidential office presses a button and everyone has to, and then that's how things work. There is a whole apparatus of which Diosdado Cabello is an extremely important part. And at the moment, in his role as interior minister, obviously he is in charge of sort of domestic security forces, and that's an incredibly important job at the moment, because I think part of what the United States were hoping for was in kidnapping President Maduro, but without doing a full ground invasion and occupation of the country to bring about regime change, they're hoping perhaps that through the kidnapping, this could trigger a sense of panic in the population, a sense of chaos, perhaps sort of criminality, looting, protests, which can then trigger regime change itself without the United States having to go in and occupy and do a full boots on the ground invasion, which we know the United States wants to avoid because of how costly that would be, because of how unpopular that is within the United States, and the very real possibility that they wouldn't win in such a conflict, but precisely because of some of what Chris talked about, the sort of civic military union within the country. That means that it wouldn't be a war between two standing armies, but a much more unconventional conflict, which the United States, over the course of history, has not always been able to win. So I think the United States was hoping that a breakdown of order could do that work for them. But it's people like Diosdado Cabello who have to ensure that doesn't happen. But of course, that's a task that's much wider than just the security forces. That's the media, the official channels of communication that the state has in Venezuela that has kept people informed and calm, and shown people that the elected Bolivarian government is still in charge. There is no breakdown of institutionality, and therefore, can avoid this scenario of chaos.
Yeah. I wanted to, and I have more questions for you, Chris, of course, but I wanted to ask you before we move on, Ollie, you have spent a lot of time in Bolivia. How does this coup and kidnapping, attempted coup, kidnapping, how does this compare to what happened in Bolivia? What are the parallels and what are the differences?
Well, Bolivia had a coup in 2019, and that was a regime change in that the government collapsed. The government was overthrown by the military and the police, of course, with the support of the United States. But that's, of course, a very different scenario to what happened now. I believe if the moment that the Evo Morales, the president at the time, was forced out, all of the institutions of the state were no longer able to function in a normal manner, and the forces backed by the military and the police were able to take over. Immediately, for example, the state TV channels were literally ransacked, looted. People went in and threw everyone that was working it out and took over the signal. Taking over airports. These are the kind of things that you get in a full regime change. Now, this is not what happened, obviously, in a few days ago on January 3rd, where yes, Donald Trump puts out this post on his social media saying Maduro's been captured, job done. We've taken out the enemy, but on the ground, the government still had control of the institutions of the state. The communications of the government were still, running live on air and communicating everything that was going on to the population. So this was not. We can see the difference between that situation, which was a coup, and to the situation in Venezuela, which was a kidnapping of a head of state, but where the state itself is still intact and is still fighting for the defense of his national territory, for his national independence and his natural resources. That fight is now. It's a process that's going on right now, and it's we had all of this gloating, and I'm sure everyone would have seen on social media, not just from Trump himself, but from everyone, on the American right, talking about, yes, we're the US, we can do what we want, we can go in and just press a button and anywhere in the world and take people out. We can take entire countries. They have not taken Venezuela. Venezuela has not fallen. They are Trump, whatever his comments about him managing Venezuela and managing Venezuela's oil, he is not managing Venezuela or its oil. I'm sure he has plans about how he will attempt to do so, but he does not right now. And the fight to prevent that is going on right now.
Well, I wanted to ask both of you to respond to a clip from Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, and apologies for this, but I thought this was fascinating because we were just talking about Diosdado Cabello, and here is Margaret Brennan speaking to Marco Rubio, and I think that what she says is fascinating and what he says is fascinating. So let's take a look at what she says, and again, she's going to be mentioning Diosdado Cabello, who you just spoke about.
I'm curious because you just described the regime as still in place, essentially. I mean, I'm curious why the Trump administration decided to leave it intact and only arrest Nicolas Maduro and his wife, the person who controls the police, the chief thug, Diosdado Cabello. He's the interior minister. He's been indicted by the United States. He was in that indictment the administration released. He's a narco-terrorist. There's a $25 million price on his head. He's still in place. The defense minister, who has deep ties to Russia, $15 million. I'm confused. Are they still wanted by the United States? Why didn't you arrest them if you are taking out the narco-terrorist regime?
You're confused? I don't know why that's confusing to you.
They're still in power.
It's very simple. You're not going to go in and wrap up. But you can't go. You're going to go in and suck up 5 people. They're already complaining about this one operation. Imagine the howls we would have from everybody else if we actually had to go and stay there 4 days to capture 4 other people. We got the top priority. The number one person on the list was the guy who claimed to be the president of the country that he was not. And he was arrested along with his wife, who was also indicted. And that was a pretty sophisticated and frankly complicated operation.
It was.
It is not easy to land helicopters in the middle of the largest military base in the country. The guy lived on a military base. Land within 3 minutes, kick down his door, grab him, put him in handcuffs, read him his rights, put him in a helicopter, and leave the country without losing any American or any American assets. That's not an easy mission. And you're asking me why didn't we do that in 5 other places at the same time? I mean, that's absurd. I do think this is one of the most, daring, complicated, sophisticated missions this country has carried out in a very long time. Tremendous credit to the U.S. military personnel who did it. It was unbelievable, and tremendous success. And today, an indicted drug trafficker who was not the legitimate president of Venezuela, who we don't recognize, the Biden administration didn't recognize, 60-something countries don't recognize, the European Union doesn't recognize, and many countries in Latin America don't recognize. He was a indicted drug trafficker. He was arrested. His wife was arrested, also
but the
indicted,
the others who are also indicted are still
system of courts.
The others who are also indicted are still in place. So that's the point of my questioning there. But you talked about not being the legitimate.
So you wanted
president.
us to land in 5 other military bases?
No, I'm asking why you chose that this was the limit of the military operation. But to your point that you just made, that
okay, so
that Maduro was not the legitimate president.
The guy was claiming to be the president.
Yeah. Yes.
One thing that stood out to me there was the whole narrative coming from Washington after this is we are the most powerful country on earth. We can do what we want. We're not bound by international rules or laws because we have all the power. But when asked why he couldn't do a full regime change, the first thing he says, the first point he makes is that imagine the outcry. Imagine the international outcry. And I think perhaps if he had more time to prepare for that question, then maybe he wouldn't have put that as his first. But I think the fact that he did do that sort of off the cuff shows that the US is not as powerful as that they are boasting in this situation, and doesn't hold all the cards as they claim to do in this situation. And that's why I think, we've got to bear in mind that the plan, I think one part of the US's strategy was the belief that through this sort of shocking and dramatic kidnapping of Maduro, that the sort of center of power would disintegrate and, through chaos on the streets, do regime change for them. But that has not happened, but precisely because of the strength of institutions in Venezuela that are extremely resilient and have been for many, many years now.
Yeah. Good point. Chris, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, there's so much from Brennan's, from what Brennan says to what Rubio says, but yeah.
I'm hesitant to really give any space to what Trump and his band of sycophants say, partly because it's so profoundly irrational, and they are fascists. If you say the way they speak, they circle around different mushy ideas, confusing ideas. But there is a common theme, and you might call it id, but I would call it fascism. That it is fascism. So in fascism always forefronts irrationality. Katie, I know you've done work on the Spanish Civil War. In the Spanish fascism, there was a slogan, Viva la muerte, long live death. This is a complete expression of madness. But fascism likes to forefront irrationality. And I suppose that's supposed to be a show of strength. So in some sense, I'm reluctant to even give any consideration to what they say. But I would like to say something, which is to contrast the chaos in the Trump administration, the inability to present a coherent discourse, probably not even the desire to, but the complete, I'd say it's somewhat, to rely on a somewhat old trope, it's a tragedy and a farce, but it's leaning more towards being a farce. And I would contrast that with the situation here, where everybody's on message, where everybody acts with a unified command, where everybody knows what they're supposed to do and acts with serenity and determination and relies on the people. Obviously, when one test of democracy, there should be a wide debate about what democracy is. It's often sad how little debate there is. And one important feature of democracy is clarity in communication. Because if you fail to communicate things to your people, there cannot be a discourse around what you're doing. There cannot be commentary, participation, and pushback. Of course, Hugo Chavez was a great communicator, and that was a part of the democratic experience here. But that tradition has continued. But that tradition has continued here. So this failure to state as a failure of democracy in the United States is a gross understatement. They no longer even desire democracy. And here we have a democracy where people communicate. You can actually see how Nicolas Maduro responds to the desires of the masses. He responded to the desires of the masses to return to socialism, to strengthen the communes. And so there's a two-way discourse going on here all the time. So I would say there's a big difference there. And again, to go into the territory I don't like, which is commenting on what Marco Rubio says, I'd like to say that they cannot really even say they had a military victory. If you think about it, what is a military victory? War is a continuation of politics, as we understand. And to have a military victory, you have to have a political plan, and they absolutely lack a political plan. Whereas here, our political plan is very clear. Our political plan is sovereignty. In fact, when you listen to their plan, they talk about the Monroe Doctrine. Again, the Monroe Doctrine was born in tragedy and farce too. Throughout the whole 19th century, the United States was completely incapable of enforcing anything like the Monroe Doctrine. There was a French emperor in Mexico. There's always been European colonies in the Caribbean. And even as late as 1980, Britain reestablished its colonization of the Malvinas Islands. So the Monroe Doctrine has never really been anything that the US is capable of carrying out. And so they think that by announcing a doctrine, where they call it the DUMB-roe Doctrine, I would call it the DUMB-roe Doctrine. It should be called the DUMB-roe Doctrine. They think that by announcing a doctrine, they can dominate us. But no, here we have a doctrine. That doctrine is called Bolivarianism. Bolivarianism is the longstanding aspiration and reality of Latin American sovereignty. Latin America has had sovereign countries for something like 200 years. That is a huge advanced political achievement. And there's a strong discourse here. And Bolivarianism is a shorthand we use. Bolivarianism stands for Latin American sovereignty. It stands for Latin American integration. There are numerous steps. Hugo Chavez continued it. The Cubans continued it. Nicolas Maduro continues it. So we have our doctrine, and we have our force too. And I think that the political soundness of our project is, and the high moral ground we have, is a strength. They have nothing of that kind.
I mean, sure, you can giving space. I mean, he is the Secretary of State, and Donald Trump is the president. So I think it's worth analyzing it. And I think it's worth analyzing the media. I mean, I was kind of blown away by how belligerent Margaret Brennan was. I mean, she's like asking for more intervention than there already was, which is just, again, the thing that the thing that's so frustrating about media bias is that unless you're working hard on it, or you do a lot of your homework, or you're very, involved in this, you won't even realize the media bias, because all you're seeing is the very media that is being biased. I actually wanted to sorry, trigger warning, but I did want to play another clip of not very unpleasant. And this one is with Jake Tapper and Stephen Miller. And they make these two people we just saw look like angels, kind of. But there's some really shocking stuff that gets said in this. So let's take a listen to what happens here.
A source briefed on the Venezuelan operation told me that a handful of American troops sustained bullet and shrapnel wounds, but none are life-threatening. Can you share with us how serious any injuries to American service members might be, and also any information you can tell us about any Venezuelan civilian casualties?
Yes. Well, let me take the second part first.
And by the way, this, of course, Stephen Miller is Trump's Homeland Security advisor, real racist, xenophobe, just disgusting person all around. Okay.
First, which is that the overwhelming share of casualties and fatalities that were inflicted were against the Cuban Guard that had exerted control over the people of Venezuela. So what many don't realize is that for years, Maduro stayed in power through an illicit deal with Cuban communists to provide his security, because he didn't trust his own people to keep him safe. That is how much he was hated inside of Venezuela. So what our special forces encountered when they did that daring midnight assault into Caracas were armed Cuban guards, and they sustained massive numbers of casualties. I can't give you an exact number. The numbers that you've seen in terms of the Cuban guards publicly reported are probably lower than the actual number that were killed. To your first question, no, none of the, at least as I've been briefed, none of the injuries are life-threatening. Everybody is stable. And it just underscores the remarkable skill, precision, courage, and capability of our special forces. And I wanted to set the table one more time for your audience. I'm sure you've talked about it at length already, but the United States of America launched an assault force
into Venezuelan territory,
Right.
which has sophisticated air defense systems, which has sophisticated surveillance systems, which has weaponry that they've received that can take out planes and helicopters from our foreign adversaries that they've been stockpiling for years in anticipation of the possibility of such an action.
So we're gonna there's actually more in this clip, but I just wanted to highlight first of all how disgusting and dehumanized the discourse is around the. First of all, I have to admit that I was surprised that he was even asked about casualties of non-Americans because our media doesn't care at all. And I did a search Apple F of the main Sunday news shows, and not a single one of them mentioned the casualties of non-Americans, so Venezuelans and Cubans. But the way he talks about these Cubans being killed as something that not only is it's not just collateral damage, it's actually something to be celebrated, according to Miller. So I want to know your thoughts on this.
I want to say something. I mean, starting with the idea that there were not civilian casualties. Fort de Tiuna, the military fort there, is a site of Gran Misión Vivienda Venezuela. Many people, especially poor people, live in the fort. A friend of a friend was there, and the attack happened about 50 meters away from the wall, in which the windows were blown out, and he has 2 children there. He managed to get them out. People were killed in that area. Children were killed. So the idea that it was a surgical military operation is a lie. About the Cuban security detail, I really think that should be seen in exactly the opposite way. First of all, it's not the case that all of Maduro's security team was Cuban. Part of it was Cuban. All of them died. What does that mean in political sense? That means all of them were loyal. That means complete revolutionary commitment. And also the fact that some of them were Cubans, maybe half of them were Cubans. What does that show? That shows revolutionary internationalism. That shows confidence in the Cuban people. That shows that Latin American people are one people. How can that not be considered a victory? So I think, and also there was resistance. Even though the United States took out the advanced anti-aircraft systems, they did shoot back at the helicopters and they hit them. So, and also, even Trump, again, I hesitate to mention his words, but he admitted that the security detail put up a fierce firefight. So again, this is a political victory on our side. It's proof of our revolutionary cool-headedness. It's proof of the revolutionary mettle on our side. And it's proof of the internationalism, because they don't only have to confront Venezuela, they have to confront they have to confront Latin American revolutionaries around the continent. Colombia has an important revolutionary movement still in arms, and they are all supportive of our government here. Cubans are revolutionaries, and they're seasoned revolutionaries, as we've seen, and they support us. So I read that in the exact opposite way, as a sign of our political victory, as a sign of our revolutionary condition.
Yeah. Ollie, do you have anything to add to that analysis? And not just this one clip, but just your thoughts on kind of the internationalism that defines this movement.
Yeah, of course. And, you know, the history of the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela is fully tied up with the Cuban Revolution, and also the wave of social movements across Latin America. And Chavez's vision was always to build a movement that was, not just inside Venezuela's borders, but that united the whole of the continent. Now, I think the reason that the United States is able to do operations like this, to kidnap presidents, heads of state, to carry out sanctions regimes, is the division of is the divided nature of Latin America and South America at the moment. The strongest moments of Venezuela, throughout the 2000s, especially, was the years when you had this strong bloc. What's called abroad as the so-called pink tide, but the wave of governments in Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, and beyond, that created such a powerful sense of unity, in which they had organizations of integration, which they had massive economic and political cooperation between these governments. And through that unity, we're able to push back attempts at intervention from the US. Chavez himself, for example, played a huge role in pushing back the attempted coup in Bolivia in 2009. And that sense of unity is what gave Venezuela and the other governments of that time massive strength. And obviously, Venezuela is now in a much weaker position in that there doesn't exist that level of unity and strength that existed in parts of the 2000s. So that is that is what the United States has been able to bank on, and that it should be a point of reflection for the rest of Latin America, that the United States will be able to carry out these type of actions in Venezuela and elsewhere if there is this level of division and the United States is able to carry out a strategy of divide and rule.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to ask you guys about more about the discourse surrounding what Maduro is doing or what he's done and what's happening in Venezuela. There's a lot of talk of like intrigue and people selling people out and backstabbing. What are your thoughts, especially you, Chris, as someone who's there, on what is happening and politically?
I have to say that the idea there's been betrayal is completely flies in the face of every piece of empirical evidence there is. As I indicated, the government responded with unity and determination and loyalty from the beginning. If you think about, I mean, just to put things in perspective, if you think about it, we've seen what betrayal means. Because in 2002, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Metropolitan Police went against the government. They went to the streets. A group of people took Altamira Plaza, and they held it with arms for several days. This is what division looks like. This is what betrayal looks like. There's nothing of that kind that has happened here. So I don't know where people let their fantasies run, but it seems to me that those kind of fantasies represent, on the part of people who even consider themselves progressive, those fantasies represent a kind of latent colonial desire. I think that you should think about what has actually happened here. And there's been absolutely no indication of betrayal. One relevant fact I think people should think about is that Nicolas Maduro decided to go on doing politics somewhat as normal. The very day he was captured, he had received a Chinese dignitary. And so he was not being especially careful about his whereabouts. He had to go around the city in a motorcade, which obviously exposes him. So he made the political decision, the brave decision, to go on doing politics to present to the people the sense that he wasn't afraid. And that's probably why they're able to locate him and carry out this attack using high-tech weapons, which I don't really consider to be an important victory. If we think about what people should not forget the lessons of history, the lesson of Vietnam, the lesson of Algeria, even the lesson of Afghanistan. You do not dominate a people through high-tech attacks. We're giving up on our own revolutionary heritage if we don't realize that with commitment, with discipline, with unity, even a weaker but more committed people can defeat a more powerful enemy. That's why when I hear things like Vijay Prashad has invented a term, the angry tide, that's very good. Okay, he's coined a term, the angry tide, which is the opposite of the pink tide, and it represents a threat to the pink tide. Okay, so the tide exists, but the tide is not the ocean. You shouldn't conflate the tide with the ocean. There are many progressive forces here, not only pink forces, but red forces. Mm-hmm. Cuba is a red force. The Colombian guerrilla is a red force. And we have people who are quite red here and willing to stand to the last. So I think that this is not a situation in which we should overestimate our own weakness faced with this enemy, nor should we overestimate Latin America's condition. Of course, we have lost Chile, we have lost Honduras, we have lost Argentina in a terrible way to a terrible kind of fascist leader. But there's also, what has been accumulated here in terms of revolutionary lessons, revolutionary memory. And I think we've seen that memory, that collective memory play out here in Latin America. So I want to push back against some of these ideas that you see circulating that the government has no choice but to accept the terms of what Trump is offering. That's absolutely not the case, especially if you see the political chaos on Trump's side, even the elite rupture. Think about the fact that they've been unable to produce elite rupture on our side, but they did have elite rupture on their side because Alvin Huxley from the Southcom decided he wasn't going to take it any longer and left. I'm talking about the admiral that headed up Southcom who resigned at the end of the year. So elite rupture is on their side, and I think here we shouldn't underestimate our own forces and our own capacity. And I think what we've seen here in the last 72 hours in Venezuela is a perfect sign that we do have force here, even internationally. If you think about it, we've had responses from allies around the world. If you count by population, you know, China supports us. There were mobilizations in Pakistan. There were mobilizations in the cities of Europe, in the cities of the United States. So count the numbers, and you'll see that that's more on our side than on their side.
Yeah, and
we definitely agree with Chris against this sense of defeatism that has, understandably been expressed, especially on social media. You know, we live, especially in the Twitter age. Big events in the world happen, and it's easy to lose one's head, and you're seeing 100, sensationalist takes coming at you 100 miles an hour. It's understandable that people can sort of get panicked and think that the world is coming to an end. But I think we have to sometimes take a step back and look at the big picture. Of course, the US military is a much more powerful force than the military of any single Latin American country. We've always known that. We've always known that the United States is more powerful than any single Latin American country. And we know that the divided state of Latin America has put Venezuela in a weaker position than they have been in the past. But this isn't some, we're feeding into Donald Trump's intentions with his shock and awe tactics by accepting that, because the Latin American left has been through much worse moments throughout its history. You know, if we look at the 60s, 70s, 80s, where anyone on the left in Latin America was in hiding, where you had military dictatorships in almost every single country, especially of South America, all coordinating with each other to repress anyone across borders. And that was a much darker situation for the left in Latin America. And those forces not only survived, but managed to reorganize and then take power. Or we can even look at the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when all across the world, it was declared that socialism is over, the dream is gone, that anyone on the left now has to attach itself to the neoliberal end of history. But within a few years of that happening, you had Chavez, coming to power in Venezuela, and all the other governments as well across South America. So, I think both of those moments in our recent, I'm not talking about 100 years ago, I'm talking about, the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, were much darker and more difficult periods for the left in Latin America, much worse than what we have now, which, yes, it was a tremendous, a tremendously bad moment, the kidnapping of President Maduro, but with the government is still empowered, that the fight hasn't been defeated, the fight is still on, and the left, especially in Latin America, survived much worse moments than this.
Yeah, and what are other countries doing right now to support Maduro and fight back against the United States?
Well, it depends what countries we're referring to. Within Latin America, as I've said, already, is that we have a very divided situation. We have, presidents like Javier Milei in Argentina who are actively celebrating this moment. Other right-wing governments in the region whose initial, such as Bolivia and elsewhere, whose initial reaction was to celebrate this because, of course, they're entirely attached to the United States. Ideologically, politically, and every other way. So their instinct was to support this. But I think since then, we've actually seen quite a muted reaction, even from those, US-aligned states, because of how shocked they are of the manner, the discourse that Trump has had, I think it's the White House accounts itself saying the hemisphere is ours. The resurrection of the Monroe Doctrine as in a much more nakedly imperialist, colonialist manner, in terms of the rhetoric. And I think a lot of people are reflecting now that this is, this is going to go, their intentions go a lot further than fighting communism or spreading democracy. Actually, their intentions are something else entirely. Their intentions is to loot and enslave every country of Latin America. And all of their discourse has been geared towards stating that very openly, that this is not about Venezuela. This is about them imposing themselves across the whole hemisphere. So now people are waking up to that. We saw the president of Chile, Gabriel Boric, a sort of, this sort of centrist figure who, he's on the way out, but he's still the president at the moment, saying today it's Maduro, today it's Venezuela, tomorrow it could be us. Right. And that is very true. And that's a very, obvious and correct observation. But he's someone that has spent his entire time in office attacking Venezuela, encouraging regime change efforts in Venezuela. But now that things have got real, it's clearly spooked him. Following on from that, we have Trump's threats of basically doing the same, kidnapping the president of Colombia, kidnapping the president of Mexico. And I think we can see a situation in which the extent in which the US rhetoric is going so far that they are, I think, risking alienating their own allies in the region. And as people, behind the scenes are going to take a real evaluation that the United States does not have best interest of any country in Latin America at heart, and that this operation was not just about Venezuela.
Well, I wanted that's very encouraging, and I do think that this is something that has touched people around the world. I wanted to show people, since we've been talking about democracy, and since the United States likes to present itself as democracy and Venezuela as, the antithesis of democracy, I thought that you guys would be interested, and the audience would be interested in a video of a 22-year-old woman in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her name is Jessica Plichta. She's 22-year-old preschool teacher, and she's an anti-war organizer from Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was speaking during a protest to an ABC affiliate about this protest and about Venezuela. And let's take a look at what happened to her.
I'm sorry, Katie, but I don't see that.
Oh, that is sorry about that. That would be where's that one?
But if you'd like to come back to it, I'm sure I can get that ready in a minute or two.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's another one.
I know the one you're referring to is where someone is sort of speaking to, Vox Pops, the media, and then
it got removed. So let me see if someone can send that to me. I'm not sure where it is. So why don't we do this instead? We'll flip it the order. Nate, if you could get that to Brad and text it to him, that would be great. I think it got accidentally deleted, but here's another video that is relevant. You have the Fox News video, Brad? That's C05.
This stuff from the judge translated to him by an off-screen trend.
Okay, wait, sorry. Let me just explain what this is. So what we're about to see here is an interesting take on what Nicolas Maduro experienced in the United States.
All of this stuff from the judge translated to him by an off-screen translator to ensure that he understood. He said he did. Interestingly, he said after the judge read him a version of Miranda Rights and included the fact that he had the right to potentially be released on bail, Maduro said he was unaware of those rights. And it struck me that he's coming from a very different legal system. because it seemed like he had never even conjured the notion that he's entitled to an attorney, he may be able to apply for bail, and he has the right to use, to stay silent. He has the right that none of the material that he has said outside the purview of counsel necessarily has to come in. So it was interesting to see him sort of taking that in a system very different from the one I'm sure he's used to.
So okay, he's apparently really touched by the rights afforded to him in the United States. Any thoughts on this?
I don't know, maybe Chris had more experience of the US, of how the US prison system actually existed.
Well, I mean, I think Chris is having some tech issues, but this would actually be the perfect time. Brad, do you have the other video ready?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a great, I think, segue to go from that video about the alleged rights afforded prisoners in the United States. Let's take a look at next this video of a woman, the 22-year-old teacher in Grand Rapids, Michigan, at a protest against the attacks on Venezuela. Something very interesting happens.
Not just in a foreign issue, it's our tax dollars that are also being used to commit these war crimes. It is also the duty of us, the people, to stand against the Trump regime, the Trump administration, that are committing crimes both here in the U.S. and against people in Venezuela.
Now, in the background of this interview, you could see that police car. And now right here, we're showing you video we have. Immediately after the interview finished, Plickta was arrested by 2 Grand Rapids police officers. You can see it in the video, and an officer tells Plickta that she is being arrested for obstructing a roadway and failure to obey a lawful command from a police officer. You can see as she's taken away in that car, she was issuing a number of messages about wanting the U.S. to free Maduro. But again, she was taken away by police officers there. And you can see in this video, officers were closely following this procession in downtown Grand Rapids. We have reached out to GRPD for more information about the arrest, but we have not heard back so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's quite the metaphor.
Yeah, no, of course. It does remind me a little bit of, I don't know if people saw a few months ago when I think the Ursula von der Leyen was speaking in Belgium, at some sort of event in Belgium, and there was a pro-Palestine protester. And she says, oh, well, you see, if you had done that in Russia, you'd be taken away. And as she was saying that, the protester was taken away by police. So I think we're going to see more of these type of incidents emerging definitely in the US.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think we may have lost Chris. Hopefully not in an undemocratic way. Oh no, here he is. Chris, are you back?
I am. Can you hear me?
You're muted, I think.
No, I can hear Chris.
Oh, you can? Say something again, Chris?
Hello. Am I online?
Yeah, you are. Maybe on my end. Yeah. Were you able to see that nice juxtaposition?
No, I failed to see the clips. Something happened to the internet here.
Well, it was a Fox News correspondent was saying how touched Maduro was by the rights afforded to him in the United States. And then right after that, we watched a clip of a 22-year-old woman who was arrested literally just for speaking out at a protest against the attack on Venezuela.
So striking contrast, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's worth kind of discussing more. You know, the claims. There's so many claims right now. People are tweeting this out that there are people being rounded up in Venezuela. Can you just respond more to the claims that there is a lack of democracy in Venezuela? And I know this is something that you write a lot about, Chris. And then Ollie, what your thoughts on this framing is?
Yeah, well, there's so much that's just outright lies. It's hard to know how to really work against such an outright lie. People are being rounded up. That's not true at all.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, maybe one incident that people refer to was immediately after the July 28th elections of 2024, there were extremely violent protests in the street, and those people mercifully were put in prison to prevent violence spreading, prevent harm to everyone else in the country and the city. So I believe that the government's always shown a great deal of restraint, and it's always permitted protests. It permits the democratic opposition to participate in elections. And so I think that these things that people say about, I mean, it's hard even to know where to begin. This is one of the most democratic countries in the world. The current president has been ratified through numerous elections. In the time of the revolution, there's been approximately 30 elections. And the government has been consistently honest in recognizing when it is lost. For example, in 2007, there was an attempt to do a reform of the Constitution, and that was lost, and we recognized it. The same thing with the loss of the National Assembly in 2014. So here's a country that plays by the rules, that permits people to protest as long as they don't do so with an extreme level of violence. I mean, if these kind of comparisons, the people should know them. I mean, do you really think that you could go out and start shooting at the police or shooting at the presidential palace in any country and not be put into, not be detained? Those people were not harmed bodily; they were just put in prison. So, and nothing has happened in these days. There's been nobody rounded up, and there's been no protests on the part of the opposition. The opposition here is really defeated. They've been defeated on a political level. They really have no project of a country. You know, as everyone knows, Maria Corina Machado enters the long list of bloodthirsty Nobel Prize winners, from Henry Kissinger to any number of war criminals. But here, she has absolutely no weight. Nobody, even in the opposition, talks about her. And the opposition does not have figures, it does not have a movement, and most important, it doesn't have a project. So I don't know what world people are living in. They trade in the most gross lies. And it's actually just a sign of a radical kind of Eurocentrism, that people feel that Latin America can just be a world where you can say whatever you want about it. You can just say that something, I think Lindsey Graham said, Maduro's killed millions of people. What does that mean? The blockade, perhaps the blockade has killed thousands, the blockade has killed hundreds of thousands of people. But where does this even idea come from? So it's, of course, you know, a world upside down, a world with its feet in the air, as Eduardo Galeano would say, when the kinds of things they say about our context. It's, people should take the time to go to good news sources, to listen to this program, to listen to Breakthrough News, to pay attention to what the Tricontinental Institute says, or to just grab books like The Open Veins of Latin America or numerous other publications.
Chavez gave to Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To know what's actually going on here.
Yeah. And Ollie, and you guys have been very generous with your time, but I just wanted to ask you, Ollie, if you, as someone who's based in Beijing, could talk about the role of China in kind of, I guess, in international politics in general. But there's a lot of discussion about how there was, it's because of China that the United States did this. They don't want like China and Venezuela to be cooperating. So I just want to get your perspective from someone who's based in China right now. And I have to try to plug in my Wi-Fi again, so I'm going to be off video, but I'm watching on my phone. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think the past, the past 20 years of the Bolivarian Revolution, if we're talking about Venezuela specifically, China's been an incredibly important partner of Venezuela, as the world, as the United States sanctioned Venezuela and had the complicity of other Latin American countries in enforcing those sanctions. China was there to disregard that and continue trading with Venezuela. They're a major purchaser of Venezuelan oil, of course, when the United States began the blockade on that. And then that was an incredibly important part of how Venezuela was able to reconstruct economically after the worst years of the sanctions of the effects of the sanctions in around sort of 2019, 2020, that period. So yes, but China has been a hugely important ally of Venezuela. In terms of, will this operation, damage, is the US trying to carry out regime change in Venezuela as a kind of proxy to try and attack China? You know, yes, China buys oil off Venezuela. It represents, you know, around 3 or 4% of their oil imports into the country. In fact, China's main policy in terms of its domestic energy supply is investment in renewable energy. It has the largest industrial capacity in terms of building things like solar panels and other green technology. So this is, you know, they're framing this as some big power play. What it really is, you know, factors that are much more internal to the United States and their policy to Latin America. I think actually the failure of the United States to be able to compete with China economically, to compete with them in the tech war, has actually made them try to look to Latin America to project their power, which is very much reduced. As I said, they're not able to compete economically with China. They're not able to compete in the tech war. So they're trying to consolidate their power by battening down the hatches and attacking Latin America. So I think that's the real story. And yes, of course, and China will continue to be an important ally of Venezuela, and maintaining trade, maintaining economic cooperation in the face of the sanctions that still exist and that are being tightened right now in Venezuela. And that's been the role of China with every country that has been sanctioned by the United States. China's been there trading, cooperating with everyone that has been the victim of sanctions at the hands of the US.
Yeah. Well, any last words that you want to share? You guys have both been so generous with your time. I have so many more questions. We also have a surprise final guest that we are sending, that we are bringing onto the show, who will be joining us from Caracas. But yeah, what else do you want to make sure that the audience knows? I mean, I think they've already learned a lot from listening to you guys, but.
I would like to second what Ollie says about China. China is the exact opposite of what the United States foreign policy is. China promotes mutual growth. It's always, it has a non-military, non-imposition attitude towards other countries. And so it's an example of a totally different kind of diplomacy, a totally different way of relating to countries. And also, as everyone knows, some people lack words or concepts to describe the new form of imperialism that Trump is promoting. But I would like to say to point to a key feature that I think describes this situation. It's that Trump is proposing that the United States will be, and he in particular, as the executive of the United States, will be a kind of unique colonial hegemon. In the colonial legal notions and colonial justice, essentially the colonial hegemon has the right of life or death over every colonized subject, whether it's any part in the world, whether it's Qasem Soleimani, who was killed 6 years ago on the date. Right. So the United States is proposing that it can just exercise the right of life over death over subjects everywhere in the world. When you see Trump and his band of sycophants speak, to them, other nations do not exist. Other peoples do not exist. The world is a group of individuals over which they exercise complete power of life and death. Apart from that, the resources of the world all belong to them. Again, this is a colonial notion. So essentially, Trump is promoting a radical new colonization of the entire world. I think everywhere around the world, people will reject this, maybe sooner or maybe later. But this has to be seen as an aggression against every people in the world, every nation in the world, especially every people and nation that desires to be free. And when they say they're going to run the resources of Venezuela for the benefit of the Venezuelan people, again, that flies in the face of every lesson that's been learned from history, from the process of anti-colonial struggles and decolonization that occurred in the 20th century. Everything indicates that it takes a people's control of its own resources to prosper. Mexico became a prosperous country when Lázaro Cárdenas nationalized the oil resources. Famine ceased in India when India became a sovereign country. Every decade under British colonial war rule, millions of Indians died from famine. And with the mere fact of Indian independence, famine ceased, major famine ceased. So sovereignty, control of resources, self-determination is the key to prosperity in the world. The viewpoint of the world that Trump is promoting is an absolute negation of every principle, And it's a total attempt to deny sovereignty and dignity to people in the world and a prosperous future, even their existence.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what Chris is saying. I think the world has to wake up that the United States does not represent any universal principles or universal values. This long, the years of packaging of US imperialism as democracy promotion, as this or that. I think we can see now that was entirely a PR exercise, and now that Washington has decided that it no longer wants to, go to the efforts of giving it that packaging. So we have to, the world has to wake up to that. And when we see actors, recipients of US funds, etc., preaching in the name of these supposed universal values, we know that is not the true intentions behind these people, that in fact that they are actors of a foreign and hostile force that is currently seeking to violate the sovereignty of every nation in the world, and the only thing constraining them is their physical capability and their internal economic problems that they have in the United States. But I think one thing I would say, just to part and to everyone viewing this, is that I know that this is incredibly. These are dramatic times, and there's a lot going on, and there is an instinct, I think, to be glued to social media, to apps like Twitter, where it seems like 100 different things are going on at the same time, where there's so much messaging from the White House. I think it's good to try and tune out the noise, to try and remember that when there is messaging coming from Trump, from Rubio, from the White House, that it has an intention, that they're not relaying the truth, and that every take you see on social media from so-called military experts or breaking news accounts that are not actually real media outlets, to evaluate these things properly, to tune out some of that noise, and to look at the big picture. And the big picture is that Venezuela suffered a terrible attack, but that it has not fallen as a country, and that the fight to defend its sovereignty is going on right now.
All right. Well, great. Thank you guys so much. And we are going to bring on our final guest. You guys can stick around if you want, but also I totally understand if you need to go. You're nodding, so you want to go?
No, I was just going to say venceremos.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, venceremos. Okay. Good night, everyone. Sorry about these awkward segues. I don't know why. I guess I'm having separation anxiety from my guests, but I'm very excited to bring on Diego Sequera, who is a journalist, writer, translator, editor, political analyst based in Caracas, and he is also the founding member of Misión Verdad. So, welcome, Diego. Hi.
Hey, Katie.
Thank you so much for joining. Good, you?
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Good.
So we just wanted to, I was really excited to interview you, and I didn't know if you were able to join. So I'm very excited that we are able to join. We've been talking to, we spoke to Chris, who's in Caracas, about what he was experiencing on the ground. We spoke to Ollie, who is used to be based in Bolivia, and now he's in China, actually. He's in Beijing. So we talked a little bit about the international relationship among different Latin American countries, and also between China and Venezuela. Is there something in particular you want to make sure that we talk about that you feel like is being missed by the media or being missed by the analysis of Venezuela?
Well, actually, I'm not sure, but I was just going to comment. I just drove around. I've been traveling for like 4 days, 5 days to finally reach Caracas, making stops and stopping in rural areas and talking with with campesino movements and also and to see what beyond Caracas is going on. And it's basically I'm pretty sure that Chris already addressed this, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to be that different either. Basically, things are calm now. Today was actually a day in which people were about their businesses. I had friends that went to the registration and, sorting out stuff with, documents regarding cattle and that kind of stuff. So this kind of small daily life elements, I think, are very important to address and to make people take into account that life still goes on the most simple, direct, local level. And I think I think there's something that you cannot lose sight from in this context, because precisely that shows that, we're still standing. There's no breakdown. There's no unrest. There's nothing crazy going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, what have you been seeing and hearing from the people as you've been traveling throughout the country?
Yeah, basically there are two basic reactions to them. Overall, of course, you have the people who are less politicized, that are either about their business or they're just home. So, as in, usually at the afternoons, you're going to see a lot of people in the porch of their houses and just doing the usual town stuff, which is meeting your neighbor or your family and just talking about the day and having coffee or playing domino, that kind of things, which is, and especially these days. I mean, today it's Reyes,
Kings.
The Three Kings. Which is also part of the festivities, and festivities here are quite important, especially the holiday and end of the year holidays. I even got to hear at some point Trump saying that the attack was planned actually for Christmas, which makes this even more dark and insane and cruel. And I don't know how much. I don't know how much of people are aware of the extent of the attempt to dehumanize a whole population that actually doesn't deserve any of this at all. And I'm not talking only about what's going on the last week. I'm talking about more than a decade, actually, when things were really getting tough, when sanctions started with all this color-coded revolution attempts and unconventional warfare, and also the ways to try to strain the structures of the state and create, either the legislative power as opening the gateways, or created, even as we all remember, fake presidents in order to bring about that change that it got up to this point. And it got up to this point basically because everything else has failed. And it has failed mostly because they're also focusing on, and this is something I've been saying a lot, on us doing their bit. Like the cheapest way to reach their goals, not only Trump, mind you, this is also a bipartisan thing. You cannot, I mean, it's very nice to see all these Democrats now concerned and saying stuff, and of course, now suddenly they're worried about Venezuela. Not only, and I might add, not only in the U.S. I'm also talking about the liberals in Latin America and Europe in particular. Now they're all scared. I mean, you had people like Gabriel Boric, the
Chilean president.
Yeah, who's coming out of office right now, and of course gave the country to a far right Pinochetista.
Right.
But I mean, they were so militant about us. They were so aggressive about us. They contributed so much in this collective character assassination that you cannot forget this. This has been a sustained contribution between let's call it, for lack of a better name, ideological lines, in order to get to precisely to this point. And this point is where nothing worked, so they did what they did against Presidente Maduro and the First Lady Cilia Flores. And I think there was also a haste in this, precisely because one of the things that were not working anymore was precisely their staple model of regime change, or put on pressure and try to crush the economy and go slow motion on destroying people's lives, which was sanctions.
Right.
And Venezuela has proven basically that they can be that you can overcome them. So I think this is also part of the, if there's some method into this madness, this was part of the conclusions, preliminary conclusions that the Prince of Darkness, Marco Rubio, have probably thought about. I think, and I'm saying it one more time, I think there's no one more dangerous in the world right now than Marco Rubio, even more dangerous than Netanyahu, and because he's the only one that actually has furniture inside his brain. I mean, not only delusional hot air and I don't know what kind of demented landscape inside. I mean, this guy knows what he's doing. This guy knows that this is his plan, and this is the furthest that the Southern Florida Neocon Yard Club has got in their 70 years of being one of the favorite U.S. mad dogs to do the worst kind of things, the worst kind of causes throughout Latin America, and even inside the United States, as we are very well aware of. So
right.
I think it's an element that you have to always keep into account. But just to finish the point, it's funny to see people who actually sponsored laws and sanctions and everything else, and different kinds of misadventures, different styles, of course, by proxy, indirect approach, NGOs, whatever, just a year ago, or more now, formally a bit more than a year. And so here we are, and this is all on them, all of them.
So when you're, and I have to actually, I'm going to go off screen because I have to grab a jacket because my, speaking of saying, I mean, I'm very privileged, but my heat just went off. So, which will be temporary though. But I want to ask you two questions. One is if you can kind of elaborate more on who you're talking about when you're talking about people who drafted sanctions.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, kind of name names, and also then I want to talk to you about what it's like living under sanctions, because one of the things that I always appreciate that Aaron Mate does is that he tends to call them murderous sanctions, which is really important because I think sanctions sound so kind of
abstract,
harmless, abstract, and like just a policy thing, and it's like, well, war is bad, war kills people, but sanctions is don't do that. So can you elaborate on those two things, and I will be right back. I'm listening.
Sure,
it's not on video.
No, go ahead. I mean, the list is quite long. I mean, let's talk about Tim Kaine, for example. Let's talk about this disgraced guy, Bob Melendez. Let's talk about Marco Rubio himself. Let's talk about the late, hopefully in hell, John McCain. All of these are people. These are names. Talk about Adam Schiff, another one that now they're all concerned about Venezuela, and of course they're not. This is just another opportunity to do something within internal politics. Now, living within sanctions, let's put it as easy as this. I mean, we had the highest salary in the whole hemisphere. We had the highest living standards, or at least on the top on the hemisphere, before 2015, when it started. And how does this translate? If we go through stages, it was first a moment of shock and upheaval look, in 2014, when the Guarimba started, which was it's the local name for all this tactics of this violent tactics to disrupt daily life into all the Gene Sharp stuff, as in challenging the authority, and the non-violent spook style of organizing. That was the first moment that the state defended itself. And by the way, it was led back then by Leopoldo López, Antonio Ledesma, which some people forget about him. They call him the vampire here, by the way, and Maria Corina Machado. And what's important here, I'm jumping 11 years back, 12 years almost.
No, this is very helpful.
Because after El Comandante Chávez died, there was this natural process which is pretty natural. It's pretty ingrained in Venezuelan fabric, in which people were like reaching out back again. I'm not saying that with Chavez it was a polarized thing, a completely polarized thing, but there was this empathy, this sense of gathering, especially from the opposition, who were far more scared than us during those years. And it was a natural, organic process that showed you that there were scars, the wounds inside our society weren't that deep. There was no, they didn't reach any kind of point of no return. And suddenly, this happens. This attempt to fracture precisely all the threads that make a society itself. And mind you that it was shocking, it was violent, and of course the response of the state was a logical one, and it would be the same that even the U.S., especially the U.S., in the U.S. it would have been far worse actually. I mean, you had to go tough on some of these goons and criminals who were also hired. They were actually behind the people who were actually, maybe some of them well intended to support freedom and on all those cherished values, and to give, but basically they were there to give context, to give a picture, to give a narrative, but there were dark operators behind that. So responding to this violence, curtailing this violence, thwarting higher stages of defiance in a very well-planned scheme became the raw material with which a year after, in March, Obama signed the first decree, which inaugurated the sanctions regime. So, of course, at first it was, no, this is, some government officials were sanctioned because of it was based on in the Civil Society and Human Rights, Venezuelan Civil Society and Human Rights Act or something like that, sponsored among others by John McCain, Marco Rubio, Bob Melendez, Tim Kaine, and others. And so when this happens and became the raw material, yeah, people just basically said, no, this is not going to go further. This doesn't affect the Venezuelan people at all. This is not going to happen. But suddenly things started to happen. Economic boycott, financial boycott, trade boycott from the outside, from our neighbors, from the Colombian government back then. They started like withholding, for example, huge doses of important insulin, pretty specific kind of things that Venezuela relied on, because Venezuela back then had major weaknesses and soft spots in which it was quite easy to exploit, being also an over-reliant oil economy that it didn't diversify itself as fast enough would be. So, and then became, the whole thing about hoarding, lack of goods in the streets and the long lines, and the whole by the way, the memes about toilet paper. I don't know if you remember that, Katie, but they made a lot of fun about us because there wasn't any toilet paper around. And this gives me, and I'm going to jump just for a moment, 5 years fast forward in 2020, when COVID started, when the COVID lockdown cringe started, I had a really enormous sense of schadenfreude when I saw Germans and all those advanced countries just losing it precisely because of toilet paper. And when they told us during the lockdown that it was going to be a tough one, we basically laughed because we already went through so much. I mean, this basically dismantled the health system. It blocked the oil revenues that actually funded the whole national budget, and mind you, on a very large public sector, in a very active public spending. So this also impacted on pensions, which were the ones the highest in Latin America again. Actually, this is important because usually the very non-sexy, boring left usually focus on the youth and so on regarding who was this revolutionary subject. But the revolutionary subject in Venezuela, and still is, are the abuelas. Mm-hmm. And the abuelas are retired. The abuelas had a good pension. That pension gave her enough to buy, for their grandkids and to buy food for home and to be able to live a quite decent life. So now once that was fractured, and once the horizon, the aspirations and the dreams that people had were basically destroyed and crushed, that's the moment in which the migration, of course, started. And keep in mind that there's a piece written in the Brookings Institution by two guys. One, it's called Douglas Barrios, who has always been a honcho of the comprador elite, and also he's now an Ivy League dude. And the other one, it's a guy who's Venezuelan Israeli called Danny Bahar.
What is Douglas' last name? Douglas what?
Barrios.
Yeah.
So they, both of them, by the way, both of them are proteges of Ricardo Hausmann, one of the architects. Yeah, one of the architects of the austericide of the 90s in Venezuela. They're part of the growth lab in Harvard and so on and so on.
Yeah.
They actually made a prospective of which was going to be the number of people coming out of Venezuela. And they said back then, 2017, they said it was going to be 7 to 8 millions. So that has been the baseline for the whole spin, and to just fix a number without considering any kind of natural dynamic of people, yes, leaving, and also people coming back. And this has also been the baseline for all the UN reports of, especially the High Commission for Human Rights and so on, which basically the sourcing is based on outside sources, unnamed sources, people, none of them inside Venezuela. And this is the moment that people started to migrate. And Venezuela was never a country of immigrants. Venezuela was a receptor country. We received people from everywhere, especially from our neighbor Colombia, And yes, desperation had a big say in here, but also you had the government of Peru, the government of Colombia, the government of Ecuador, the government of Chile back then, all of them saying, come over to our countries, we will protect you, we'll give you low salaries, you are our brothers, and you're running away from tyranny. This is the first stage of migration. And this is very important because there was an overstimulation in order to do this under the frame of the Lima Group. Lima Group is the ad hoc group that was trying to meddle in Venezuela because Venezuela was already out of the OAS, which by the way, crashed and burned a few years afterwards.
Right.
And then suddenly xenophobia started. And suddenly the Venezuelans became the patsies. And yeah, not all Venezuelans that were migrating were actually the best ones, but of course it's just like any other society. And it's pretty sad because Venezuelans are very used to have their own safety net, social safety net, because of how we are. And once you're outside and you think you're going to get that kind of help, you realize that you end up in places pretty much close to hell or killed.
Right.
And it's also a class thing, because one thing it's the middle professional class, middle high class that went to some place and got jobs, got family there or whatever. But it's a very different thing to the people who walked all this way to become, bullshit jobs kind of things, or, the most precarious ones, or young women falling into the trap of, human trafficking and so on, or becoming the girlfriend of a narco girlfriend that suddenly ended up beating up and dead. And this is where all massive shocks for Venezuela. And then COVID came, and the Venezuelans got expelled from all this country and became this counter exodus back to the dilemma was, the conundrum was, where do we go now? Many walked back to Venezuela. And during those days is when TPS started. And that's when the people started going north.
Temporary protected status, yeah.
Except the temporary protected status with, color me shocked, our TPS is it's with Nicaraguans and Haitians. Of course. I mean, is it not a political thing? Is it clearly planned? And suddenly, all these people started walking north, going through the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, getting killed, getting raped, getting kidnapped, lives being destroyed. And some people actually made it to the United States, as we all know. But this was now the bargaining chip, the extortion, the moral extortion chip against Venezuela. We have all these people now scrambling around, and this is because of you, they say, to us, to Venezuela, to the Venezuelan government. And then, well, what happened then? Then everyone was tren de agua. Everyone was a criminal, and everyone had to be sent to Sequera. So this just describes the cruelty in which all these, I don't know, innocent, confused Venezuelans who actually believed they were going to actually finally make it, reach the dream, of course. And now they're being punished, they're being thrown into cages, or flown back to Venezuela by whom? By the Venezuelan government. So this is one of the elements that I think it's very important to keep in mind. Even, I don't know, up to this point, but still 3 weeks ago, the flights that were coming, they were taking the Venezuelan migrants out of the deportees, were Venezuelan flights coordinated with the USG. So you have all these nuances that people forget about. And then comes, so now, salary plunges. 2020, Venezuela's oil revenues dropped to 99%. I mean, just imagine what that means to a country that actually relies mostly on oil. Just think about it. I mean, it's just, it's beyond cognition in that sense. I mean, people don't understand how much that people have actually gone through here and still are here standing and prevailing regardless of whatever's going on. This is so important because I cannot think of other societies able to just stand and go through all of this, and we still meet on weekends and have beers and be goofy and do whatever, and talk to our neighbor, which is a Chavista, and the other one it isn't, and there's there might be fights or whatever, but society hasn't been vilified in that sense, and I think that's also a fundamental element. And suddenly we started recovering. Suddenly we had 130,000% of inflation recognized by the Central Bank of Venezuela back in 2020. 130,000%. I mean, that's not natural.
Yeah.
But you have to obfuscate and say this is all about a model that failed, socialismo, and socialismo bolivariano, mind you. It's a mismanagement, it's corruption, and yes, there are those things. There is corruption, there is mismanagement. There's no doubt about that. Like any other country, we have corrupt people. We don't have a corrupt system like in the United States. We don't have a corrupt system like in Europe, in Western Europe. That's a big difference. You can have criminals in countries like ours, in global South countries, but we're not criminal countries. And that's another massive difference when we talk about all of this. So, of course, living standards were recovered, but they never got back to the point where we were in 2012, which was sky high. I mean, money really made sense, And now we have to rely on whatever, in the sense that, our currency, it's just basically destroyed. But even though still we were able to manage, if it's going to be the dollar, we'll use the dollar. If it's going to be the euro, you'll use the euro. If it's going to be crypto, we'll go crypto. It doesn't matter. But life kept going.
Yeah.
It wasn't interrupted. And this is like the time frame in which nothing that they were looking for, the main objective, which was basically realigning the country back into U.S. strategic interest, nothing of this happened. Regardless of so many things, especially against Nicolás Maduro himself, there is so few people are being so vilified, character assassinated, and depicted as like the worst person ever. But I know for a fact, and there are several takes on the dignity they saw in court yesterday. And also, with all of this, he went counter Saddam. He said when the first images they were talking, when they were able to speak, what did he say? He asked Celia Flores, how do you say good night in English? He said, is it good night? And she responds, good night, Happy New Year.
I know, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, that's a summary of dignity, you know, in the way, and I'm going to be jingoistic here, in the way the people, us from Caracas are.
Yeah.
That's a Caraqueño feat, completely. So, you know, this is precisely what explains the desperation that we are heading right now. And of course, it has many geopolitical ramifications. It is a wider picture. Many big fights, huge fights that are beyond Venezuela go through Venezuela and have been going through Venezuela all this time. And I think this also, and it needs to be taken into account, but both merge. You have like Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls that local, you know, the local and contracted with the global. This is a clear demonstration of this, because it's not only, it is individuals facing massive movements that are beyond their reach.
Right. Yeah. Diego, I wanted you to respond. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that was really fascinating and important, and it gets really left out of the discussion. But kind of going back to the headlines and events, I wanted to share with you this breaking news. Let's see. So Donald Trump put on TruthSocial. Let's see. So this is today. I am pleased to announce that the interim authorities in Venezuela will be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high quality sanctioned oil to the United States of America. This oil will be sold at its market price, and that money will be controlled by me as President of the United States of America to ensure it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. I have asked Energy Secretary Chris Wright to execute this plan immediately. It will be taken by storage ships and brought directly to unloading docks in the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it before joining, joining the chat. Well, I mean, what about the drugs? What about the narco-terrorism? What about the Cartel de los Soles?
Right.
I mean, what happened? Weren't we all narco-terrorists just a couple of days ago? And now suddenly it's all about oil? And it's not only about oil, of course not. It's the most immediate and obvious part of this. And it shows you how much they want to control this in order to have a larger share of the energy market and be able to control it and to have leverage against any other oil producing country, specifically, you know, two of them, obviously, which are Iran and Russia. Probably bring the oil, in the midterm time, these are aspirations. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Bring the oil prices down and also give some more strength to the dollar, because Venezuela was also it is building its way out of the dollar. And that's part of the problem here, because the only two elements that actually gives value to the dollar, or the petrodollar, if you will, it's basically speculation, you know, the machine that goes brrr, and the other one is violence. So, I mean, talk about value of a currency. Now, this is his way of, you know, well, now, and by the way, just yesterday we were going to have a viceroy, a proconsul. It was going to be little Marco, but now he's running the show directly. So this proves one thing: there's no actual plan after what they did. There's no actual coherent planification. I don't think. I mean, he's probably making a Frankenstein of takes by, you know, by Rubio, by that, you know, by that also bright bulb of Stephen Miller and all those people who knows a lot about Venezuela, knows a lot about energy, knows a lot of Venezuelan Latin American history, and try to do this. But, you know, in a way, this is funny enough, because this works also to the benefit of Venezuela in the sense that it's going to relieve the deposits of oil, what's been also withholden by the oil quarantine of Marco Rubio. So you have now a very important contradiction there going on just with this boasting. And this actually helps oil production inside Venezuela. But of course, on that specific level. But then you have, well, the geopolitics of this. He's doing this weird-ass neuronic Caligula kind of celebration, victory lap. And this is one of these manifestations. And I think from the side of Venezuela, and this is me just, this is basically a hot take, this will become another Aikido move that we're going to have to do and to absorb at this moment. Because you're not going to defy someone that's actually has hostages, very high-profile hostages at this moment. But let's see, and also the other thing, this is all sugar high win. This is a sugar high victory. We might like to see what's going to happen in the midterms regarding all of this. Yeah, they're also pressuring, of course, which comes with this, and this the Trump corollary operating. They already ordered Venezuela to suspend any kind of deals and negotiations with, of course, with whom? With Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba.
Right.
And the Cuba fetish here, the Miami spell, like Joan Didion once said. The Miami spell is here operating quite clearly. And, this is the symbolic victory or the symbolic aspiration of the Southern Florida crazies here. Because, of course, there's this, game theory, crappy game theory, domino effect thing that, of course, if Venezuela falls, immediately Cuba will. And Nicaragua then, the whole troika of tyranny, to use in John Bolton's parlance. So it is, it is overwhelming, and it's a work in progress right now that we have to see how it is being micromanaged. But mind you, Venezuela is actually gone through enough to know how to move in this kind of things. And we are witty enough. But there's another important conclusion here regarding all of this. They say that we are the dependent ones. They say that we are the ones that actually are the underdeveloped or whatever. But guess who's the ones actually relying and depending on our oil? Because we were able to sell it regardless of how, for more than a decade, even though causing a lot of harm, by the way, to U.S. oil companies and buyers, as not only Chevron, but also Valero, for example, who was specialized in buying heavy crude for the south, for the whole refining circuit that operates in southern U.S., in Louisiana and Mississippi and southern Illinois, which are refineries basically designed for this oil, and it can't be replaced by any other. It cannot be replaced by Canadian tar sands, for example. It just can't. It just doesn't work, and you need to feed those refineries in order to, because otherwise they can collapse. So one more time, who is actually dependent on who? I listened to the last part of what Ollie and Chris were saying, and I don't know how different actually is, how our new way of colonialism is. This is colonialism 101. We're just jumping back 500 years in that sense. It's a primary accumulation kind of thing. Yes, what's important here is the other components, which is basically the nihilistic culture that's also coming with it, and also that proves that we are talking about, like Pepe Escobar usually says, a death cult that actually is nurturing this in order to this new gilded age and this new cloud robber barons to have their way and to actually control you over there, not us only. We are people outside of the walls, We're people that are not inside the sacred circle of liberal democracies. You are. And you're the ones that
the jungle.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're in the jungle. Jungles are hard to tame. Yeah. Jungles are hard to decipher. Gardens are quite easy.
Right.
And it's quite easy to herd all the people inside the garden and make them suffer as much as we are. And you are, actually. And you already are. That's the population, the U.S. population, and also the Europeans. So this also describes how harmful this is. And one more thing. He talks about subsidizing the reconstruction, quote unquote, of the Venezuelan oil industry. Do you think actually it's going to be corporate money that's going to be put into that? No, it's going to be your tax money one more time. So this also shows how self-destructive this all is. And that's why I'm saying that's why I am saying this is a sugar high win. It's a short-term thing. Let's see what happens in 3 weeks from now.
Wow. Well, this has been really fascinating, and I'm gonna hold you to it. I'm gonna have you back on in 3 weeks, or
yeah,
4.
let's do it.
Let's do a check-in again. Yeah, to see. Yeah. This is amazing, and has been great. And I mean, I'm sorry, it's terrible what's happening, but the analysis was really, really great.
Yeah, I know. We can separate one thing from the other.
Yeah.
No, and thank you for the interest. I mean, that's actually this is one of the most important things that we can be doing. I mean, this is about narratives. This is about perception. This is about a ways of representation. Exactly. So this is what we can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
For all the people,
the vilification is so dangerous. Yeah. Yeah, it really is one of those things that I mean, not to sound corny, but this is one of those things where there has been such vilification that, breaking that spell and that myth is really important. So,
to break the info siege.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Diego, definitely be in touch.
Sure.
You're our official Venezuela correspondent of the Katie Halper Show, if you'll accept it. Yeah.
My pleasure, my honor.
Great. And yes, where can people find you in your work?
Well, I work with a wonderful team on the site, news and analysis site, mostly analysis group called Misión Verdad, Truth Mission.
Yeah.
So it's Misión Verdad in Spanish with just one S.com. That's a go-to place. And we have a very dynamic Telegram channel as well. And I'm always jumping around, and sometimes I'm just running something on Press TV, or sometimes I'm collaborating with Max and Anya. It depends.
Yeah.
But the go-to place is Misión Verdad, and especially because they are the one doing the good work. I'm the bum of the team. Those are the hardworking people there.
Well, I doubt you're the bum, but yeah, thank you. And I was in Venezuela for the World Youth Festival back in
really.
Yeah.
2004, was it?
I think, yeah. I saw Chavez speak, yeah.
2005, that was World Youth Festival.
Yeah. And if my friend Sol, so my Spanish teacher, who I'm still friends with, hi Sol, if you're watching, and Barry, but her uncle was Jorge Gaitan. And I was really excited because Chavez, so, many people in the States, like no one knows who he is, but it was really cool because obviously Chavez did. And he gave a speech and mentioned him. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a big guy. That's when everything went to hell in Colombia, and still is.
Yeah.
When they killed him.
Yeah. To do a show on that too. And Bogotazo, right? And
Bogotazo.
Yeah.
By the way, Fidel Castro was there in Bogota when that happened.
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
And,
like
Che was
in Guatemala for the.
At that moment, Fidel was in at that moment was in Bogota at that very moment.
Wow.
And another thing is that happened like 3 or 4 days before the OAS was founded.
Wow.
So you also have that. And also one more final thing about El Bogotazo. I was in Bogota, right? I actually crossed the border on the 3rd.
Wow.
But the other thing is that those documents are not declassified yet.
Wow.
Up to this point.
Wow. Oh yeah, that would be fascinating. Well, Diego, thank you again so much for joining. And seriously, we'll check in with you soon. Have a great night.
You, yeah.
And good luck with everything. And yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that was so great. Wow, I'm so glad that we had that final discussion with Diego, because that was just, I don't know, really fascinating. I felt like I was in it was like both really important stuff, and I also felt like I was in a philosophy class or a literature class or history class, but about real issues. So yes, very cool guest, as someone just put in. No bio on Diego. I'll put it in because I didn't know if we were going to be able to get him on this show. And if we hadn't been, I was going to have him on I was going to do a special stream with him, but we will definitely add that. So Misión Verdad for now, and I'll make sure to add it in there. All right. So Brad, are we? Can you drop in for a second? Are we going to Patreon anything? Like maybe a little bit of the first segment. What do you think?
Well, it's tricky business there, Katie. Because I know that things of significant import or timeliness. There's taking that into consideration. But we also want to, give Patreon supporters, something for making this show happen.
Exactly. Why don't we do like a little Patreon of there's some good juicy stuff at the end with Mike and Greg.
Right. Yeah.
All right, cool. So as a reminder, if you're watching this live, you're so lucky. If you're watching this later and you want to see the full thing, you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And we appreciate your support of this show so much. We couldn't do it without you. Oh, and speaking of important stories, I will be doing another stream tomorrow at 1 p.m. right here at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. And it's going to be about Pakistan. And I will be speaking to 3 different guests about what's happening. Because remember, this story is not being covered, but obviously, Imran Khan is still in jail. His wife is still in jail. And so we're going to be bringing you more important coverage of this story. And I'll be speaking to the sister of Imran Khan's wife, who's in jail. I'll be speaking to someone else who was an ally of Imran Khan. And I'll then be speaking to Hassan Ali, who is a Pakistani journalist. So tune in for that at 1 p.m. youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. And also, I'm going to make sure I have on Camila soon. So she'll be joining. She wanted to come on, but she's exhausted because she's been doing a lot of work. So Camila Escalante will also be joining us. Not tomorrow. Don't worry, Camila, because I'm not putting you on the spot, not booking you live without checking with you, but soon. She'll be coming on shortly. And don't forget, guys, become supporters. Hit subscribe and then the bell. Go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show and like the stream. Also, if you are listening to this as a podcast, which you wouldn't be, but rate and review. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Phantom Esfanta. Thank you, the guests. Yep. What were you going to say?
Oh, something completely off topic, something that made me laugh earlier. I always tell you to treat the comments like the sun and not look directly at them. And I saw someone earlier commenting on me that I should just shave my hair. I think that, I don't know if it was the reflection of the light off my head, like thinking like it was like way back. Trust me, my hairline, it's just a sick joke. But they were supposing that I looked like I had some sort of genetic disorder or something like that.
Who is that? What a weirdo. You're fired. Well, one of the times that once I asked Brad, like out of curiosity, I was like, when did you
oh, right.
When did
Right.
your hair go
hair
gray?
go from
But I guess
blonde
it's
to
actually
gray,
white,
yeah.
right? But I call it gray. And Brad was like,
What,
when did we meet for the first time again? I was like, I don't know, 2000. He's like, well, that was when. I was when I was, yeah.
But then I'm thinking, if I do that, then I have to like grow a beard or something. I feel like.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I don't know. We might
Good
have to
luck,
like
yeah.
we might have to like poll test this. I don't know.
Yeah, poll test this,
Like do something with this.
Yeah, well, there are AI apps that you can use, so we should definitely
Katie,
do that.
we talked about this. I'm not. No.
I'm gonna do it without you. I don't care. I don't need your consent. I'll just take your photo. Anyway, by the way, I just have to say one final thing. And it's on another topic. I'll leave it. But speaking of comments, someone was like, I love you, Katie. Please no more religious discussions with Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro. I just want to say one thing. I don't know why I'm ending on this note, especially after you said don't look at the chat. But this is something I was thinking about the other day. People need to understand something. I am not at all religious. I'm not a particular fan of religion. I don't love everything in every text, religious text. I don't think that there are I don't think that the Talmud is free of is exempt of problematic things. My entire point is that I don't think that Zionism exists because of religion or Judaism. And part of the reason I say this is because you have a lot of secular people who are Zionists, and because without religion, they would be using something else. That's
and the
all
majority,
I'm saying.
in terms of Zionists, there are more non-Jewish Zionists than Jewish Zionists.
Exactly right. Yeah. So
yeah,
I just think it's a stupid argument. And I mean, again, there a lot of things lend themselves to genocide, and that's really messed up. But my only point is you don't need the religion. And yes, the Zionist founders were secular atheists. So I just want to clarify that, though. And also, like, wow, some people really can't take any criticism of Candace Owens, but that's another question, another issue. Yeah. But guys, she's wrong about the Jewish slave owners. I'm sorry. You know, being a mature person is being able to handle ideas even when they're uncomfortable, which is what someone said to me once in response to my saying, I don't think it's Judaism per se that causes it.
Andrew is just saying, and I don't know if it's in relation to what we were talking about in the last few minutes, but now we are down to 189 subscribers until we get 400,000.
Oh, so great. Awesome.
I think it's a certainty that by the time we see everyone next time, we'll definitely be there. So
yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Truly,
thank you. Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah, thank you. And we will see you. But the majority of Jews in the world are Zionists. That doesn't mean it's okay. Except a lot of them aren't religious. All right, we'll get into this another time. I just said Jesus Christ. That's rich. All right. I will see you next week, everyone. Thank you so much.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!